History is shaped by armies, by economies, by ideas. But sometimes it is shaped by a glance.
Your Honor, this is Cleopatra, the Egyptian queen whose lurid affairs destroyed two of Rome's finest generals and brought the end of the Republic.
This is not a story about politics. It is a story about obsession. It is the story of two of the most powerful people on earth, a Roman general who commanded legions and an Egyptian queen who commanded a kingdom. Their affair was a scandal, a political firestorm, and a romance for the ages. It was a love that would unite the ancient East against the West, pit brother against brother, and force the Roman Republic to tear itself apart in one final, bloody civil war. Their love would cost more than 50,000 lives, topple a 300-year-old dynasty, and give birth to the Roman Empire. This is the story of how the hearts of two people changed the world forever. Our story begins in the chaos left by a single death. On the Ides of March, 44 years before Christ, Julius Caesar is assassinated. The men who killed him claimed they were saving the Roman Republic, but they had only plunged it into a power vacuum. Rome was a headless beast, and three figures circled, ready to claim the throne. First, there was Marcus Antonius, Mark Antony, Caesar's most trusted general, a brilliant cavalry commander, a man of immense appetites for battle, for wine, and for women. He was a soldier's soldier, passionate and impulsive, loved by the legions and the common people. He saw himself as Caesar's natural successor. But Caesar had other plans. In his will, he had adopted his sickly 18-year-old grandnephew, Gaius Octavius, and named him his primary heir. This boy, who would become known as Octavian, was everything Antony was not: cold, calculating, and ruthlessly pragmatic. He had Caesar's name, but none of his charisma. Antony dismissed him as a lad, a political lightweight. It was a fatal miscalculation. And then there was the third player, the wild card, the Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a direct descendant of one of Alexander the Great's generals. She was not merely a ruler, she was a political mastermind, a brilliant strategist who had already seduced and allied herself with Julius Caesar to secure her throne. She had a son by Caesar, Caesarion, and in him she saw the future, a unified Greco-Roman empire ruled from Alexandria. With Caesar dead, she needed a new Roman champion. The stage was set for a collision of ambition, and the fate of the world hung in the balance. After avenging Caesar's death at the Battle of Philippi, Antony and Octavian divided the world. Octavian took the troubled West. Antony, the glorious, fantastically wealthy East. In 41 years before Christ, while preparing for a war against the Parthian Empire, Antony summoned the Queen of Egypt to his headquarters in Tarsus. He accused her of aiding his enemies and demanded an explanation. It was meant to be an interrogation, a display of Roman power over a client queen. Cleopatra understood the language of power. She knew Antony was a man who appreciated spectacle and pleasure. She did not come to Tarsus as a subordinate, but as a goddess. The ancient historian Plutarch describes her arrival as one of the greatest theatrical entrances in history. She sailed up the river Cydnus in a magnificent barge. The stern was gilded, the sails were royal purple, and the silver oars beat time to the music of flutes and lutes. Cleopatra herself, Plutarch writes, was dressed as Venus in a picture, reclining under a golden canopy, fanned by boys dressed as cupids. The perfumes from her barge were so potent they wafted to the shore, intoxicating the crowds that gathered to watch. The word spread through the city like wildfire. Venus has come to feast with Bacchus for the common good of Asia. The entire population of Tarsus flocked to the riverbank, leaving Antony sitting alone in the marketplace. The man who had summoned the queen was now an audience of one. When Antony invited her to dinner, she replied that it was more fitting for him to come to her. Intrigued, he went. He found a scene of unimaginable luxury, but what truly captivated him was not her beauty, which Plutarch notes was not incomparable, but her presence. The contact of her presence, he wrote, was irresistible. The attraction of her person, joining with the charm of her conversation, was something bewitching. She could switch between languages like an instrument of many strings. She matched his soldiers' humor with her own sharp wit. The interrogation was forgotten. The Roman general, the conqueror of the East, was utterly ensnared. Antony abandoned his planned war. He followed Cleopatra back to Alexandria and spent the winter of 41 to 40 years before Christ in a haze of pleasure and indulgence. They formed a drinking society they called the Amimetobioi, the Society of Inimitable Livers. Their days were filled with lavish banquets and their nights with wild escapades. They would disguise themselves as servants and wander the streets of Alexandria, playing pranks on the residents, drinking in common taverns, and getting into brawls. It was a life of pure theatre. In one famous story, Antony, frustrated after a day of catching no fish in front of the queen, secretly ordered a diver to place fish on his hook. Cleopatra, seeing through the ruse, praised his skill but sent her own diver down the next day. As Antony proudly pulled up his line, he found not a fresh fish, but a salted herring from the Black Sea. As everyone roared with laughter, Cleopatra leaned in and said, "Leave the fishing rod, General, to us poor sovereigns of Pharos and Canopus. Your game is cities, provinces, and kingdoms." It was a playful jab, but it held a sharp truth. While Antony was playing games in Egypt, his kingdom, the Roman world, was in turmoil. His wife, Fulvia, had launched a disastrous war against Octavian in Italy, and the Parthians were threatening his eastern borders. Duty was calling. Heartbreak was coming. Antony left a pregnant Cleopatra and sailed back to Rome. Back in Rome, Antony patched things up with Octavian. To seal their renewed alliance, he did the unthinkable. He married Octavian's sister, Octavia. She was the perfect Roman woman, modest, loyal, and virtuous. She was everything Cleopatra was not. For 3 years, Antony played the part of the Roman husband and statesman, but the pull of the East, and of its queen, was too strong. In 37 years before Christ, he reunited with Cleopatra to plan his long-delayed invasion of Parthia. He sent his pregnant wife, Octavia, back to Rome. It was a personal insult and a political declaration of war against Octavian. From this moment on, the two most powerful men in the world were on a collision course, and Octavian, the master propagandist, had found his greatest weapon, Antony's love for a foreign queen. Octavian began a relentless propaganda campaign in Rome. He painted Antony not as a rival, but as a traitor, a man who had abandoned his Roman heritage. He was enslaved to the passion and the witchery of Cleopatra. He had gone native, adopting the decadent, effeminate customs of the East. Octavian's message was simple and terrifying. This was not a civil war between two Romans. This was a war for the soul of Rome itself, against a foreign whore queen and her Roman puppet. Antony, blinded by love and ambition, walked directly into Octavian's trap. In 34 years before Christ, after a minor military victory, he staged a bizarre and provocative ceremony in Alexandria known as the Donations. Before a massive crowd, he and Cleopatra appeared on golden thrones, dressed as the gods Dionysus and Isis. Antony declared Cleopatra Queen of Kings and her son Caesarion, King of Kings. He then distributed vast territories of the Roman East to his children with Cleopatra. To the Romans, this was an outrage. He was giving away parts of their empire to foreign children at the behest of his Egyptian mistress. But Octavian's masterstroke was yet to come. 2 of Antony's allies defected to Rome and told Octavian a secret. Antony had deposited his will with the Vestal Virgins in Rome. In an act of shocking sacrilege, Octavian marched into the temple and seized it illegally. Whether the will he read to the Senate was real or a brilliant forgery, we will never know, but its contents were political dynamite. It allegedly confirmed Caesarion as Caesar's true heir, directly challenging Octavian's legitimacy. It gave more legacies to his children with Cleopatra, and most damning of all, it commanded that his body, no matter where he died, be sent to Alexandria for burial beside his queen. The Roman people were horrified. Their greatest general had turned his back on his homeland. He was no longer a Roman. Octavian had his justification. The Senate stripped Antony of his power and declared war not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. The final war of the Republic had begun. The final confrontation came at sea, off the coast of Actium in Greece. Antony's fleet was larger, his ships like floating fortresses, but his men were suffering from disease and low morale, and many of his Roman commanders distrusted the presence of Cleopatra and her Egyptian squadron. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his genius Admiral Agrippa, was smaller but faster, manned by better-trained crews. The battle raged for hours with no clear winner. Then, the unthinkable happened. For reasons still debated by historians, Cleopatra's squadron, which had been held in reserve, suddenly raised its sails and fled the battle. Antony, seeing her purple sails disappear over the horizon, made a decision that sealed his fate. He abandoned his men, his fleet, and his honor. He transferred to a smaller, faster ship and chased after her. Left without their commander, the rest of Antony's fleet was thrown into confusion. Demoralized and surrounded, they surrendered. His land army, which had watched the disaster unfold from the shore, held out for a week before defecting to Octavian. In a single afternoon, Antony's dream of empire was shattered. The love that had been his greatest strength had become the cause of his ultimate ruin. Antony and Cleopatra fled back to Alexandria, a defeated couple. They knew Octavian would follow. They dissolved the inimitable livers and formed a new society with a darker purpose. They called it the Synapothenoumenoi, the Society of Partners in Death. Their friends enrolled as those who would die together, passing their final days in a feverish round of feasts and parties, a last, defiant blaze of decadence before the end. When Octavian's army arrived in the summer of 30 years before Christ, Antony's remaining forces deserted him. Defeated and betrayed, he retreated into the city. It was then that Cleopatra, fearing his rage and perhaps hoping to provoke his end, sent a false message. She had killed herself. Believing the last reason for his life was gone, Antony resolved to die. He asked his faithful servant, Eros, to kill him. But Eros, unable to strike his master, killed himself instead. Inspired by this act of loyalty, Antony fell on his own sword. The wound was not immediately fatal. As he lay dying, another messenger arrived. The queen was still alive. Antony begged to be taken to her. He was carried to her mausoleum, but she would not open the doors. Instead, she and her 2 handmaidens let down ropes and hoisted the dying general up to the window. Plutarch calls it the most piteous sight imaginable. Smeared with blood, Antony was drawn up into the arms of the woman for whom he had lost the world. She tore her clothes, beat her breast, and called him master, husband, and emperor. With his last breath, he told her not to grieve for him, but to seek her own safety. Then he died. Octavian captured Cleopatra, intending to parade her through the streets of Rome in his triumph. But she would not be humiliated. On the 12th day of August, 30 years before Christ, after dressing in her finest royal robes, the last queen of Egypt took her own life. The legend says it was the bite of an asp, hidden in a basket of figs, a death fit for a goddess. With her death, 300 years of Ptolemaic rule ended. Egypt became a Roman province. The Republic was dead, and Octavian, now styling himself Augustus, was the undisputed master of the world. Was it love? Or was it a fatal obsession? A strategic alliance that spiraled out of control? In the end, it was all of them. The passion of Antony and Cleopatra was both genuine and a political tool. They dreamed of a new kind of empire, a fusion of East and West, ruled from Alexandria. But their love blinded them to the cold, ruthless ambition of the man in Rome. Their story is a timeless warning. A warning that personal passion, when wielded by those who command armies and kingdoms, can have world-altering consequences. Their forbidden love did not just end their lives. It ended an age, and in the ashes of their affair, the Roman Empire was born. Thank you for joining me on this journey. The past is a vast archive, silent, waiting, and every story we uncover brings us closer to understanding who we are. So, what should we explore next? Tell me in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious and keep questioning.